Welcome to the darkness, where every shadow hides a story. I'm the Doctor, and in this world, reality is just the beginning of the terror. Grab a seat, turn off the lights, and let's dive into tonight's tale of fear. Don't say I didn't warn you. The Russian sleep experiment. In the depths of the Cold War, a secret Soviet research facility embarked on an experiment meant to test human endurance. 5 soldiers, selected for their mental fortitude, were locked in a sterile, windowless chamber for the experiment. Their goal? To survive without sleep for 15 days. The scientists began by introducing a potent gas, ensuring the men were unable to sleep. At first, the men resisted, struggling against their bodies' natural urges to rest, but as the days dragged on, the soldiers began to deteriorate. Their eyes grew bloodshot, their skin pale. Whispers filled the air, some claiming they could hear voices in their heads, others swearing they had seen figures lurking in the shadows. On the 5th day, one soldier, whose sanity had been the strongest at the start, began talking to an invisible entity. "She says the gas is a gift," he whispered. "She says it's making us see the truth." His comrades ignored him at first, but soon they began to hear strange sounds in the darkness, distant, like whispers from a world beyond. By the 10th day, one of the soldiers stopped speaking entirely, sitting motionless with his eyes wide open. His lips were sealed in a grimace, as if trying to force his body to reject the unnatural state. He wouldn't move, even when the others begged him to respond. On the 15th day, they found his body, a twisted mockery of humanity. His muscles shredded from the inside, his body no longer resembling anything human. His eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. The scientists, shocked by the gruesome transformation, ordered the experiment to end. But before they could open the door, a voice rang out from the shadows. It was the last soldier, his voice hoarse but defiant. "We aren't the only ones in here anymore," he said. "She's with us now, and she's not letting us go." As the scientists approached the door, it was too late. They never returned, and the facility was abandoned. What happened inside those walls remains a mystery, but the chilling sounds that echoed through the night tell a story of a horror far beyond their understanding. The Forgotten Divver. Ethan had always been obsessed with the obscure corners of the internet, trawling forums and online marketplaces for rare collectibles. One evening, he stumbled upon a listing for an old video game cartridge. It was labeled Deep Abyss, with no cover art, just a sticker bearing an eye surrounded by curling waves. The seller's description was cryptic: rare, found in storage, not for the faint of heart. Despite the odd disclaimer, Ethan's curiosity got the better of him. For $10 and free shipping, it was an easy gamble. The cartridge arrived a week later, its surface dusty and scratched. Ethan slid it into his retro console, half expecting it not to work. But the screen flickered to life, revealing a basic start menu. Press Start to dive. The game was crude, its pixelated graphics reminiscent of early 90s arcade titles. Ethan controlled a small diver who explored underwater caves, searching for treasures, while avoiding hazards like collapsing rocks and aggressive sea creatures. It was simple and oddly addictive, until he reached the 3rd level. In this stage, the music changed, slowing into an eerie, warped melody. The ocean floor became littered with strange shapes. Were those bones? Ethan brushed it off, chalking it up to the game's attempt at horror. But then he noticed something that wasn't in the earlier levels. A shadowy figure, barely visible in the background, always at the edge of the screen. At first, Ethan thought it was a trick of the game's design, a harmless, atmospheric addition. But as he continued, the shadow grew closer, its vague outline sharpening into the shape of a humanoid figure with glowing red eyes. It didn't seem to interact with the diver, but its presence unsettled Ethan. By the 5th level, things got stranger. A text box popped up mid-game, something Ethan hadn't seen before. The words chilled him. "Why are you here, Ethan?" His heart skipped a beat. How did the game know his name? He tried to rationalize it. A weird coincidence, maybe. But the more he played, the more personal the messages became. You can't escape the depths. The deeper you go, the closer I get. The final level was unlike anything before. The diver entered a massive sunken temple, its walls etched with ominous symbols. The shadowy figure was no longer a background detail. It stood in the center of the room, waiting. When Ethan approached, the screen flashed, and a distorted voice emerged from the speakers. "You've gone too far." The screen went black. Ethan tapped the console, expecting a crash, but then the game returned. Except it wasn't the game anymore. It was his reflection. His monitor now displayed his room, viewed from behind him. Ethan spun around, but no one was there. The game's final text appeared on the screen. "Now you're the one being watched." Ethan unplugged the console and threw the cartridge into the trash, but it didn't matter. Every screen in his house now showed faint glimpses of red eyes in the darkness. When he closed his eyes at night, he felt as though he was sinking deeper and deeper into the abyss. The Backrooms. You wake up in a room that seems eerily familiar, yet profoundly alien. The air is thick with the smell of damp carpet, and the walls are an unrelenting yellow, lit by flickering fluorescent lights that hum like an invasive swarm of bees. The space feels endless, a labyrinth of interconnected rooms and hallways that loop in nonsensical patterns. There are no windows, no doors leading outside, just more rooms, some impossibly large, others unnervingly small. As you wander, the sense of dread grows. Your footsteps echo too loudly, and you're never sure if the distant shuffling sounds are your own or something else. Scratches on the walls and discarded belongings hint at those who came before, but there's no sign of them now. Sometimes you think you see a flicker of movement out of the corner of your eye, but when you turn, there's nothing. And then you see it, a shadow that moves against the light. Too far to discern, but too close for comfort. You feel a chill run down your spine, the hairs on your neck standing on end as your instincts scream at you to run. Your pace quickens as you try to navigate the maddening maze, but the walls seem to shift, closing in tighter, twisting the path ahead into something unfamiliar. The fluorescent lights above buzz louder, flickering as though they might die at any moment, plunging you into complete darkness. You find a piece of paper on the floor, a hastily scribbled note. "Don't trust the corners." The shadow reappears, closer this time, and the lights dim for just a second. When they return, the shadow has taken shape, a grotesque figure with elongated limbs and hollow, unseeing eyes. You turn and run, but in the back rooms, every path feels like it leads you further from escape and closer to whatever waits. Slender Man. Deep in the woods, where the trees are so dense they blot out the sky, there's a legend whispered by those who dare to camp too far from civilization. They say he's tall, unnaturally so, with impossibly long limbs that blend with the trees. His face is blank, devoid of eyes, nose, or mouth, yet you feel his gaze pierce through you. You're hiking with friends when you notice the forest has gone silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive stillness. Then, you see him, a figure standing motionless in the distance, half hidden by the fog. You blink, and he's closer. Your friends laugh nervously, but their smiles falter as the figure looms larger. Suddenly, one of them screams and bolts into the woods. You're frozen, torn between chasing them and fleeing yourself. As you call out for your friend, your voice feels swallowed by the silence. The fog thickens, twisting the trees into nightmarish shapes. You take a hesitant step forward, but every direction looks the same, the once familiar trail disappearing into an endless sea of gray. Panic sets in as you hear a faint rustling behind you. You turn sharply, only to find nothing but the unnerving stillness of the forest. Hours pass, or maybe it's minutes. Time feels meaningless here, The figure reappears, closer this time, its elongated limbs stretching unnaturally as it moves. Your other friends are gone, their calls for help fading into the distance. You run blindly, tripping over roots and branches, but no matter how fast you go, the figure seems to glide effortlessly, always just out of reach, but never far enough to give you hope. By the time you decide to stop and catch your breath, it's already behind you, its featureless face inches from yours. No sleep stories. Everything is true here. The staircase appeared overnight in the forest behind your house. It wasn't there yesterday, you're sure of it. A perfect spiral of pristine white steps, leading up to nothing. Curiosity gnaws at you until you finally decide to climb. At first, it's just steps, but as you ascend, the air feels heavier, the world below shrinking into an unrecognizable blur. The trees around you vanish, replaced by an infinite gray void. You lose count of the steps, but you can't stop climbing. Something's pulling you upward. A sound, or is it a voice, whispering your name, soft at first, then louder with each step. You call out, but the only response is your own echo. The higher you climb, the stranger the staircase becomes. The pristine white steps begin to warp, cracks spreading like veins, and the air turns cold enough to see your breath. You feel the weight of unseen eyes watching you, and every so often the faint sound of footsteps below, as though someone is following. You stop to catch your breath and look back, but the ground is gone. The staircase stretches endlessly in both directions, leaving you suspended in an unending climb. And then you feel it, a hand on your shoulder, cold and impossibly strong. A voice, distorted and inhuman, whispers directly into your ear, "You shouldn't have come." You turn to see nothing but empty air. When you look back, the stairs ahead have changed. They're no longer white, but stained dark, with something that looks like blood. You realize too late that there's no going back. Psychosis. Dexter hasn't left his apartment in weeks. At first it was just a bad feeling, a creeping unease every time he looked out the window or checked his phone. The news stopped making sense, reports of people disappearing, strange symbols appearing in the sky. His friends' texts grew erratic, filled with typos and nonsensical phrases. Then they stopped altogether. He's safe inside. He knows that much, but the silence outside his door is deafening. Occasionally there's a knock, a neighbor, delivery. He doesn't answer. The messages on his computer grow stranger. One day, he receives an email, with no sender and a single line of text. "Let us in." The power goes out. The only light is the faint glow of his monitor, displaying a live feed from his hallway camera. There's nothing there. And then, there is. A figure standing motionless, staring directly at the camera. It doesn't move, but Dexter swears it's getting closer. He closes the laptop, heart pounding, and turns to face the door. The knocks grow louder, more insistent. He tries to rationalize, telling himself it's just his imagination, but the shadows in the room seem to grow longer, darker. The live feed flashes on his monitor again without warning. The figure is closer now, standing just outside his door. He watches in horror as the doorknob begins to twist. The screen glitches, and the feed changes. It's no longer showing the hallway but his apartment, from a perspective that's impossible. Someone, or something, is filming from inside. The camera pans to him sitting at his desk, frozen in terror. Behind him, the door creaks open slowly. He doesn't dare turn around. The screen goes black, but the sound of footsteps fills the room. They stop just behind him, and a voice, low and guttural, whispers, "You let us in." Candlelight Harbor. There was a local legend in the sleepy town of Beacon Bay, known to a select few as Candlelight Harbor. It was the kind of place where childhood memories twisted into something uncomfortably eerie. People whispered about the old forgotten TV show from the late 80s, Candlelight Harbor, an unsettling program only available to those who had cable in the very early days of TV. The show had a strange cast of characters: a jester with unsettlingly sharp teeth, a silent girl with wide, glassy eyes, and a lighthouse keeper whose voice never matched his lips. The town's elders would often recall the strange themes of the show. It was like it was trying to get to us, one would say. Told us things we didn't know about ourselves. But no one could remember the full plot. It was as if those memories were smudged from existence, as though the program itself didn't want to be remembered. And yet, people couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a forgotten kids show. The lighthouse keeper character, who rarely spoke, had eyes that seemed far too familiar, as though they were watching from places they shouldn't have been. And the jester's grin, that unnerving smile, still haunted the minds of the town's adults. Some of the town's children, having seen the show, reported bizarre dreams of a fog-filled harbor. They would describe hearing a strange tune coming from an old boat out at sea. Others spoke of lights that blinked in patterns on the horizon, but when they tried to tell their parents, they were met with dismissive smiles. Over the years, the old show became an urban legend, a tale told to scare young ones into obedience. Yet the unsettling truth remained. There were no records of Candlelight Harbor, except a few blurry VHS tapes stored in a dusty attic, and whenever someone watched the show, they would sometimes hear a soft knocking, as though someone was standing just behind them. Analog horror, local 58 style. It's 2:17 a.m. and you're alone, flipping through TV channels out of boredom. The screen suddenly goes black before a familiar local station, Channel 58, flickers on, a cheerful logo and jingle play, but something feels off. The programming cuts to an emergency broadcast. White text scrolls against a black background. Civil danger alert. The message is strange. Do not look at the moon. Then, avoid mirrors and windows. Your heart races as the messages grow more ominous. They are watching through your screens. The broadcast cuts to footage of a quiet neighborhood. The streets are empty, save for shadowy figures moving unnaturally in the distance. The camera zooms in, and you swear one of them turns and stares directly at you. You grab the remote and shut off the TV, but the screen stays on, showing your reflection. Except you're not alone. Something else stands behind you, smiling. The smile doesn't belong to any human being. It's stretched too wide, the teeth too sharp. Your breath catches in your throat as the figure in the reflection raises a hand and waves. You turn to look behind you, but there's nothing there. The TV flickers again, displaying a live feed of your living room. The angle is unfamiliar, as though someone's filming from the corner of the ceiling. You see yourself sitting on the couch, staring at the screen, but something is wrong. The figure is back, standing just outside the edge of the frame, inching closer, with every flicker of static. The broadcast cuts to black, leaving you in silence, save for the faint sound of breathing, and it's not yours.
The Silent Witness.
It was a stormy night at St. Mary's Hospital when she arrived. The emergency room doors burst open, carried by paramedics who had found her near the old train tracks. She was silent, utterly still, with a face so unnerving that the nurses froze in place. At first they thought she was wearing a porcelain mask. Her skin was unnaturally pale, smooth and glossy, as if molded by an artist. But as they leaned in to examine her, they realized the horrifying truth. It wasn't a mask. That was her face. Her expression never changed. She didn't blink or speak, and her wide, glassy eyes stared ahead as though fixed on something far away. The doctors whispered among themselves, unsure how to proceed. Her vitals were normal, perfect even, but her presence felt anything but. "We need to admit her," Dr. Grayson said after some deliberation. He was a seasoned professional, but even he couldn't hide the unease in his voice. The woman was placed in room 217, where she remained utterly motionless. Nurses reported strange occurrences. Equipment in her room malfunctioned without explanation. Flickering lights and sudden cold drafts that couldn't be traced to the air conditioning. One nurse, Emily, swore she saw the woman move. "I was checking her IV," Emily whispered to her coworker, "and for a second, I swear her head turned. Just a little, like she was looking at me." The other nurse scoffed. "It's your imagination. She hasn't moved a muscle since she got here." But the unease spread. Patients in nearby rooms complained of strange dreams, visions of shadowy figures watching them from the corners of their rooms. Some awoke screaming, claiming they couldn't breathe. On the fourth night, Emily was assigned the evening rounds. She dreaded entering room 217, but duty called. As she approached, she noticed the door was slightly ajar. The lights inside were dimmed, and the monitors emitted their usual beeping. "Miss Doe?" Emily whispered, stepping inside. The woman was no longer in bed. Panic rising, Emily scanned the room. That's when she saw her. The woman was standing by the window, her back to the door, her head tilted up to the night sky. "Ma'am?" Emily stammered, gripping her clipboard tightly. "Are you all right?" The woman didn't respond. Slowly, Emily stepped closer, her heartbeat thunderous in her ears. She was about to reach out when the woman turned. Her face hadn't changed. It was still that flawless, expressionless mask. But her eyes were different now, glowing faintly like embers in the dark. "She's coming," the woman whispered, her voice soft and melodic, like a lullaby. "Are you ready?" Before Emily could scream, the lights went out. When they flickered back on, the woman was gone. The next morning, room 217 was empty. Not just of the woman, but of everything. The bed, the machines, even the IV stand. All of it was missing. Every patient in the adjacent rooms had vanished as well, leaving only empty beds and faint impressions on the sheets. To this day, the staff at St. Mary's speak in hushed tones about the silent witness. She is a harbinger, they say, a messenger of something far beyond human understanding. No one knows where she came from, or where she went. But those who saw her will never forget her haunting words. "She's coming. Are you ready?" The Smiling Wanderer. Jack had always found solace in the quiet streets of his neighborhood during his late-night walks. The darkness wrapped around him like a blanket. The cool air a respite from the suffocating weight of his insomnia, but tonight was different. The streetlights flickered as he rounded the corner onto the narrow road that led to his apartment. At first, he thought it was his imagination, a shadow dancing just at the edge of his vision. But when he glanced up, he saw him, a man in the distance, standing unnaturally still under the dim glow of a street lamp. The man was impeccably dressed, a dark suit tailored perfectly to his wiry frame. His head was tilted slightly, and even from afar, Jack could make out the unnerving grin that stretched across his face. It was a smile that didn't belong, a smile that seemed too wide, too deliberate, as if it had been carved onto his face. Jack felt a chill crawl down his spine. He picked up his pace, crossing to the other side of the street, keeping his head down. When he glanced back, the man was moving. No, not moving. He was gliding, his feet barely touching the ground, his body swaying to an invisible rhythm. "Just keep walking," Jack muttered to himself, but the sound of footsteps behind him grew louder, faster. He turned his head, and the man was closer now, his grin even wider. His eyes glistened in the flickering light, wide and unblinking. "Do you like to smile?" the man asked, his voice melodic and soft, like a lullaby turned sour. Jack froze. His breath caught in his throat. The man tilted his head further, studying him with an almost childlike curiosity. "I can show you how," the man whispered. His movements were deliberate, his body twisting and swaying as though he were performing for an unseen audience. "It's easy. You just have to let go. Jack broke into a run, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound of laughter followed him, light and airy, but it wasn't behind him anymore. It was all around him. The streetlights flickered wildly as he stumbled, his vision blurring with fear. When he reached the door of his apartment building, he fumbled with his keys, finally bursting into the safety of his hallway. He leaned against the door, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. "Safe," he whispered, but then he noticed the light in his living room was on. Jack's legs felt like lead as he stepped inside. The laughter grew louder, echoing in his ears. And there he was, sitting in Jack's favorite chair, the smiling wanderer. His suit was immaculate, his grin unbroken. "I told you it was easy," the man said softly. Jack opened his mouth to scream, but the sound never came. The last thing he remembered was the man's hands, impossibly cold, pressing gently against his cheeks, forcing his lips upward. When Jack's friends found his apartment the next morning, it was empty. His belongings were untouched, his phone left charging on the nightstand. But on the wall above his chair, someone had scrawled a single sentence in blood-red letters. "Always keep smiling." No one saw Jack again, but on quiet nights, in the flicker of streetlights, some say you can hear laughter echoing through the darkness. And if you're unlucky, you might just see a figure in the distance, gliding toward you with a smile too wide to be human. That's all for tonight, folks. But remember, the night is never truly silent. If you enjoyed the chill, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that will keep you up at night. Until next time.